I want to introduce, in case you don't know him, Alan Suarez, who is the president of the Temecula Valley Young Democrats.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar, my name is Alan Suarez. I am president and co-founder of the Temecula Valley Young Democrats. So first, I'd like to, on behalf of all of us Temecula Valley Young Democrats, I'd like to thank all of you for being here and being part of the discussion. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the Temecula Valley Young Democrats, we are a chapter of the California Young Democrats, which is the official body of young Democrats in California. So our membership is from 13 to 35. If you know any young Dems that are young or young at heart, we accept those above 35. Tell them about our club, make them come out to one of our meetings, and get them registered, most of all, because we need that here in Temecula. So, let's see. So first, we wanted to put this together because more and more of us, our generation, are starting to realize that justice won't be served by a hashtag, it'll be served by our actions and our votes. And so that's why we put together this candidate forum with the help of Temecula Valley Democrats, who so graciously sponsored us for this event. So, without further delay, I'd like to get started, if that's all right with you guys. All right, perfect. So, I'd like to introduce the candidate that is here, Liam O'Mara, running for the 42nd your way up here, that'd be great. And also, Regina Marston was supposed to be here, but she actually had to deal with a family emergency, so she's in Florida right now, and she's sending her condolences our way. We wish her the very best. Hopefully everything is okay with her. And she will have an event later this month, or early August, for all of us members, so we can get informed, find out about her platform, and her website will be up by the end of the week. Okay? So. Oh, yes, and Julia Peacock was also supposed to attend, but she dropped out of the race, unfortunately, and she also sent her best regards. So for tonight, it will only be Liam, and so... so it will be Liam, and so it should be a pretty short candidate forum, being that it's only one candidate, but I hope you are prepared. We have some very tough questions.
Jump back and forth.
Okay. Okay, so our very first question for you is, what issue will you tackle first that you would say is the biggest issue facing us right now? You have 2 minutes to answer every question from here on out, and then we'll move on to another lightning round.
Is this on? Yeah. All right. So, biggest issue facing the country? Biggest push forward?
Yes.
Okay, so I see there are tons of issues that interest me, and almost all of them are interconnected in one way or another. Right? And a lot of them really hinge on problems in the economic structure of the country. So I would jump first and try to reform the tax code to actually get more money in that would allow us to do tons of other things, because we have gone in the wrong direction on how to run the tax code here. We've done 3 major rounds of cuts since the early 1980s, and every single time it has depressed wages, it has cut money out of tons of social programs, and it has massively increased poverty. Tons of other issues are all related to that one, so I would want to start with that so that you actually could credibly tackle other issues.
All right, thank you very much. So for us, we did a quick poll of our members, and we feel that the biggest issue for us is climate change, right? According to General Assembly President of the UN, Maria Espinosa, we are the last generation that can prevent irreparable damage to our planet. 11 years are all that remain before damage becomes irreversible. As young people, we are at the forefront of the consequences to come. We do not have time to wait, so what will you do within the first 90 days of your term to prevent further damage to our environment?
Okay, so this is one of those other areas that I'm pointing to that we need actually to be able to work urgently on, right? We can't tackle the climate change issue if we can't actually afford to do anything about it, because it's going to take a massive investment in completely redoing our power structures in this country, rolling out a smart grid. There's tons of things you can actually do to do it. And tons of those investments will pay for themselves, but you have to start somewhere. It has to be an investment. Right? So I would get behind, I am behind already that the basic outline of the Green New Deal, which is arguing a whole broad range of different policies that can start tackling these things. None of them are actually legislation. I would walk in with a bunch of issues to try and start putting together that legislation and push specific programs in. Because we need to take it beyond just airy rhetoric. We need to stop talking about this issue and keep kicking the football down the field, which people have been doing for a long time. We've been talking about this stuff that plays into the climate change. This has been known since the 1960s. None of this is new, right? And 2 generations in a row have kicked this ball down the court, and that has to stop.
Now, for this next question, I'd like to throw it to Davina, who's another one of our Temecula Valley Young Democrat members.
So hello, my question is, what is your stance on nuclear power and how would you deal with nuclear waste?
Okay, the waste issue has been the single biggest problem with nuclear fission to begin with, right? Nuclear power, in principle, makes sense if you can ever actually crack the nut of nuclear fusion, because then there's no actual waste. The Germans are investing heavily in that. I like watching those the developments there. We could get behind that and start investing in that kind of project, but rolling out new fission plants doesn't make a lot of sense to me because we just keep accumulating the stuff. I don't think it's a really good solution. When there is no other really good solutions for renewables, it might have made sense in the 1970s, it doesn't now. We already, solar and wind are absolutely competitive with most forms of power now. The only thing that's cheaper is natural gas, and that's falling, right, in terms of its competitiveness with it. So pushing for more solar and wind, geothermal, things like that makes sense, not nuclear.
Okay, so thank you so much for that answer. And so our follow-up question to that was that given that renewable sources provide only a small percentage of our energy and that nuclear power is so expensive, what can we realistically do to get off fossil fuels as soon as possible?
Well, the key, you're kind of getting at it in the question there. The renewables currently are a very small part of the overall grid, which is why we need to invest heavily in rolling out the production. The production unit, the cost for these things has been falling steadily for decades, right? There's tons of good companies in this. There's tons of investment already in it. There's massive battery networks being put in place that can take care of the short outages. All of the technologies already exist to do it. We just have to spend the money on it. Okay? So I would push for the investment in not only tons of renewable generation capacity, but also the storage capacity and a smart grid to move it from place to place.
Thank you so much.
All right, so now for this next question, it'll be for Joseph, another one of our young Dems.
So for the last question on climate, many climate advocates and economists, and even a handful of Republicans support putting a price on carbon emissions through some kind of tax or cap. What role do you see carbon pricing playing in climate policy?
All right, now I know it's a bad word in American politics, and unfortunately we still don't have a better name for it, but I think that a carbon tax makes a lot more sense than cap and trade. And I would be able to make arguments from this because there are actually a ton of arguments from the right. If anybody knows the newspaper The Economist, right? It's a center-right publication out of Britain. They have been behind a carbon tax for 20 years now, right? And there are tons of good arguments that you can actually use for that. So I would be pushing to actually do that. And you can't do this on a state-by-state level anyway. It just doesn't work that way. We're not all individual countries, right? We need to set a basic price on carbon emissions at the federal level and roll that out across the country.
Transitioning on to gun control and gun sense. My first question is, what steps will you take to promote safety and prevent gun violence, especially at schools and within our communities?
All right, there are two aspects to this, because the gun violence issue in this country is both there are short-term issues and long-term issues behind it here. Because There are tons of developed countries that have high rates of gun ownership and do not have mass shootings. There are specific issues within the United States that are leading to this. And I would push for a lot of long-term development there that can help that. You know, if you're improving the overall socioeconomic standing for people here, you know, because people are watching their living standards fall, there's tons of like stress that puts on families, you have poor family lives, you know, pushes kids over the edge. A lot of kids have, you know, they don't respond well to a lot of the pressures in schools these days, and people can snap. You know, there's a lot of things pushing the mass shootings issue there. But that's a long-term issue. It doesn't do anything about the people suffering now, right? So I would push for not only universal background checks on everything, removing every possible exception to that, right? So no one can do private sales, you know, with no ID, which happens all over this country here. You can't go to gun shows and pick up whatever you want. Every single sale has to be run through, you know, a federal background check system. And I would push actually for a training and certification program. You can kind of, I guess, mentally model it kind of on the DMV. You know, if you want to have a gun, okay, fine. Take a training course, pass a test. We know you know how to store this thing, you know, so toddlers aren't killing. You know that there are literally stories of dogs shooting people because people don't store their weapons right. If your dog is shooting you, the problem is you, right? So, if we can actually make sure that people who have these things know what they're doing, right? And I think a training and certification program is the best way to do that, right? And that gives us a lot more security, knowing that, you know, if my neighbor has a gun, I know it's in a gun safe, and they know that they're keeping it out of their hands of their toddlers.
So sticking to the gun control topic, I'm going to pass it over to Zaid for the next question.
All right, so you've already explained that a little bit, but what is your interpretation of the Second Amendment, and how does that apply to the 21st century?
All right. So that gets to be a very complicated issue because, I mean, I don't know if you guys, I'm a historian, so if you ask me what it meant, I'm going to go into a long rant of what it meant at the time, right? And these things are very difficult to interpret. And one of the things that's made it complicated is that there's tons of amateur historians out there telling you what it meant at the time, and tons of court rulings trying to say what it meant at the time, and a lot of them are wrong, right? But the point is, ultimately, I don't think it's relevant, right? The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld the idea that the Second Amendment does not prevent gun control legislation. It simply doesn't. It never has, right? So anything that we would want to pass in terms of gun reforms can get past the Second Amendment. SCOTUS has repeatedly argued that, right? So I don't think it's relevant. The Second Amendment is a rhetorical issue. It's just fluff, right? It's something that people, you know, like to talk about, but it ultimately isn't really the point here. Right, and we do obviously know the country is very different when it was founded. You know, at the time the Second Amendment was passed, there was no standing army, there were no police forces in this country, right? So your neighbor and his pastor were actually protecting you. No airports. Protect airfields, right? But you know, getting bogged, I think it's a trap, right? The Second Amendment is a trap for us. It gets people bogged down in trying to argue, oh, well, was it about muskets or this or that? Because it's irrelevant, right? It simply doesn't matter. Since we know that gun control legislation does not conflict with the Second Amendment, I would say we shouldn't fall into the trap in the first place, right? Don't let them choose the field of battle.
All right, well, moving on to a broader view of the economy. What are your thoughts on free tuition for college and university, and how do you plan to pay for that if you support it?
Okay, so you're hitting a personal issue for me then, as a historian. So
me too.
I mean, we've been cutting more and more money out of education in this country for a long time here. At the same time, the costs keep shooting up, because go figure, if you take more money out of the systems, then the schools have to keep raising the tuition, and they're like, oh, well, they'll just take out loans, give them more and more debt, right? Which is not really a good solution, because you want people to graduate able to enter the workforce, able to buy things even. That student loan debt will keep you from buying cars, keep you from buying houses, keep you from starting a family, right? Because it's holding the entire economy back. right? And if we can repeatedly bail out banks and automakers and everything else here, why can't we bail out a significant part of the middle class in order to boost economic growth in the country? I go beyond the question of like tuition-free public colleges here and argue that we do need to forgive student debts. Right? So, because it would be a tremendous boost to us overall, as well as obviously taking the lodestones off of people's necks. Right? But as far as where you pay for the tuition-free public colleges, and I would also include the community colleges and trade schools in that, those things can be paid for by speculation taxes on Wall Street, right? I mean, they're tiny numbers. They're very tiny. You're talking about like 0.05 percent on transactions. They're tiny numbers, but we're kind of conditioned by the media to think that Wall Street is the economy. I hope you guys know that it's not.
No.
What the stock market does has almost nothing to do with the economy there. 90% of transactions there are completely speculative, right? So if you were to put a tax on that, you would not only slow down speculation, which would start pushing the markets back toward the real economy. Back in the 60s, 90% of transactions were in the real economy, right? You'd not only start realigning the markets, but you would generate enough revenue to pay for those programs.
Now, sticking to a similar topic of the economy, broad topic of the economy, next one here is more and more jobs are being taken away by automation. There's a company in San Francisco that says if it's repeatable, it's replaceable. According to CNBC, 25% of jobs are at high risk of becoming replaced by automation. What will you do to ensure that our generation will inherit a sustainable economy?
Now, this is a big topic, and the numbers there are actually probably lowballed. I mean, but the high-risk part probably helps, right? Because at least 47% of American jobs are at risk of disappearing in the next few decades, right? And that's a conservative estimate based upon what we know now and what's currently possible. But you guys know that technology is constantly improving, right? I mean, I have one friend who's actually working at a high level in Amazon, working on the artificial intelligence that's going to start replacing tons of people, right? It's not just manufacturing jobs we're going to lose. It's service sector jobs. It's white collar jobs, right? Everything is risk, right? And so I think there's a lot of things we have to do to realign the economy. For one thing, tons of productive labor is not counted right now. Education isn't counted, healthcare isn't counted, and childcare isn't counted. Right? There's tons and tons of professions that simply do not matter. As far as economic statistics are concerned, I do no productive labor, right? As an educator. So that would be one thing to do, to start looking at how you can realign how you understand the economy. There are some things we can do in terms of retraining, and there are a lot of countries that have been investing more in education and more in training programs to keep people for the jobs that are actually still there. This is why the Germans have maintained a consistently very low unemployment rate, right? They train people for the jobs in which they're still competitive, right? One of the things that consistently amazes me is that a country with an economy 1/7 the size of the United States actually exports more than the US does, right? In real terms, like they literally sell more than we do. Right? So it is still possible to compete. We simply chose not to by not investing in the right kind of jobs there. In the long run, it's still not going to make it, right? And I think we do need to start thinking about the future, because at some point we're going to have to start taxing the robots. I think a cute parallel, I guess. You guys remember the cartoon The Jetsons? Yeah. Right? I watched that growing up, right? Do you guys notice that George Jetson doesn't really work much? He goes to work for like a couple of hours, and he comes home and he complains, "Oh my God, I had to work for 2 hours today." Right? I mean, economists for 200 years, you could go back to the early 19th century, were saying that as automation increases, right, the amount of hours people would work would fall. Right? This is capitalist economists, liberal economists, people like John Stuart Mill. Right? Over and over again, people made these predictions. With automation, productivity would go up, so human labor would go down. But that only makes sense if the pay goes up too, right? And it's not being, right? Most of the value from our productivity has been taken at the top, right? Which means that we continue to work more and more and more hours for less and less, right? And we keep losing jobs. In the long run, we have to stop thinking that way. Right? With the increased productivity from automation, we need to start thinking about how we can tax those machines and their transactions so the robots start paying us. Right? So that would be my long-term.
According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the number one reason children under 18 are admitted to hospitals is for depression or bipolar disorder. If elected, what will you do to help children get the mental health care that they need before they reach crisis point?
Okay, well, yeah, since we've been walking away from that since the 1980s, right, cutting more and more money out of care, actual care for people, we obviously have to change directions there. I would connect that to healthcare reforms in general, right? Because I consider mental health to be just one other part of, holistic health, right? I mean, the brain is an organ, just like the heart, right? So why doesn't it get the same kind of attention? Why do we stigmatize problems in one organ and not the other, right? So it has to be part of a holistic solution here. So I don't know if you guys know, I'm already for the whole single payer idea. I think the Medicare for All solution actually works if you can find a way to message it to people effectively, because it's not very well understood. People tend to think, oh, it's going to take away your doctor, you can't go to your doctor anymore here, and that's not the case at all. It's simply it's whoever's pushing the paperwork in the first place. It's just the middleman, right? If we can find a way to make that argument, right, I'd be in favor of pushing that, because the cost for everything would fall so much, right, that we can invest more in providing good care, right? And a lot of the current proposals for that, in particular the Medicare for All bill that's being pushed in the Senate there, includes a significant amount for mental health care as well, right, so that we can actually provide the care that people need.
Okay, thank you very much for all those answers. That concludes the 2-minute portion of the responses. Okay, so the next portion is going to be a little different. So we're doing a lightning round. You can only say yes or no. There are quite a few. There are no particular order. The only order that we came up, or the order is just in which the question came up with. So it's just no particular order. It's just random. And so let's begin.
One-word answers.
One-word answers.
One-word answers for this story. Are they kidding?
Some of these are tough. Okay, so very first one. Do you support a carbon tax?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Will you accept donations from the NRA?
No.
Do you support closing the gun show loophole?
Yes.
Do you support canceling student debt?
Yes.
Do you support universal background checks?
Yes.
Do you support banning high-capacity magazines?
No.
Do you support buying back assault rifles?
Yes.
Okay. Are you pro-choice?
Yes.
Are you pro-life?
It sounds like you're saying you're like pro-death or something. No.
Do you oppose the Me Too movement?
No.
Okay. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes.
Do you support the Blue Lives Matter movement?
No.
Do you think illegal immigration is a major problem in the U.S.?
No.
Do you support the LGBTQ community?
Yes.
Should transgender troops be allowed to serve in the military?
Yes.
Do you support couples of the LGBTQ community having the opportunity to adopt children?
Of course. Yes.
Should there be a citizenship question on the census?
No.
Will you accept corporate donations?
No. Well, no corporate tax.
Do you support cutting back on military spending?
Yes.
Do you support increasing accessibility to mental health services in schools?
Yes.
Would you oppose expanding workers' compensation benefits to cover non-physical ailments such as stress and depression?
Yes.
Do you support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House? Do you oppose impeaching Trump? Oppose. Impeaching Trump. Okay. Do you support the decision made on the Citizens United Supreme Court case?
No.
Okay. And the last one here, do you support the defunding of Planned Parenthood?
No.
All right. Well, that concludes the I'd like to thank you for being so honest in those yes or no questions. Okay? I think that deserves a round of applause. portion is for anybody who has any questions for the candidates. So I saw that hand over there first.
We were just talking about,
No,
one
no,
sec,
no,
sorry.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Medicare for All, the proposal. How do you see specifically that the stakeholders, being the large insurance industry, well, what their place is in all of this and how, you know, how they can be folded into the bureaucracy, that they employ millions of people?
Okay, so it'd be a complicated matter for the legislation to actually sort out, because tons of those people could be folded into the professional bureaucracy and keep their jobs. They're obviously well-trained professionals. There's going to be a need for those people. So we'd have to write it such that you can recruit people from these different companies. One of the things that we've seen with the massive waves of consolidation in the financial sector is that all these different insurance companies have tons of other fields anyway. So if they lose this one part, it's not going to take them out of business. So no real sympathy from me for that. But the workers, yes, they need to keep their jobs. We need to make sure that they can be smoothly transitioned over into a new system.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Yes.
Sorry. I'm a senior moment, I just forgot what it was. No, but the higher level insurance industry, what's their position or any, I mean, this isn't working for them either. I mean, they can't keep maxing out prices and cutting people out of access to health care. I mean, do you see some type of political co-opting of that sector and helping move that Medicare for All proposal forward?
I'm not certain I understand the question. Like, as a way, are you saying some way to like
Well, I mean,
work with them?
the blockades, the anticipated blockades you would get from insurance industry in making these changes.
Okay, so to me, that's part of a separate matter, really, because you're getting at a campaign finance issue, ultimately. Where the blockades really step in is the fact that, I'll be very blunt with you guys, I think most people in Congress should be wearing NASCAR jackets with all their owners on them. Because most of the people in Congress are bought and paid for by the industry. That is our main obstacle, right, in getting anything like this done. So one of the solutions is to keep replacing the people in there, right, with candidates who are willing to run on clean money and pushing for comprehensive campaign finance reform. Right? Until that's done, we're going to keep running into different barriers. In the meantime, I think what we do is we use the public will and public voice. We can put a significant amount of pressure through the public sphere, through actions amongst ordinary people here, and even the people in Congress will have to act and finally say, well, I guess I can't take your $10,000 check, and we'll have to actually vote to do what people want. Right? So we can put pressure on Congress regardless of where they currently stand on those issues.
Okay, so I saw Courtney is next.
Hey everyone, a lot of us here would consider ourselves healthcare voters. So as we talk about healthcare and single payer, this is my daughter Isadora, by the way, she's a little monkey. As we talk about healthcare and single payer, there's a couple different competing ideas out there. So we've got Medicare for All, which is Bernie Sanders' bill. He's tried to put through Congress a couple times. I've read the bill cover to cover, and I'm sure you have as well. It's comprehensive, it's intelligent, it's great. And then we have Medicare for America, which is a fellow proposal from the Democratic side, which deals with healthcare in a different way. So going back to the debates that we saw the candidates talk about this in the debates. Would you completely give up? I have a two-part question. Would you completely give up your private health care for a government-funded plan if you had to today?
Would I personally give up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then my second part to that question is, are you in favor of completely eliminating private health insurance, or would you allow private health insurance to run concurrent with a public option?
If you can win the public debate on this, if you can actually explain to people the benefits of it, then I would rather go with eliminating the private insurance, because it doesn't actually provide any tangible benefit, and it's the reason healthcare is twice as expensive in the US as anywhere else, right? Under Medicare system, it's going to take about 5% of my income. I currently pay 16 to 18% of my income, right? And that's common, right? So trying to hold on to a private insurance or an employer-based insurance is literally harming your financial interests, right? If I mean, looking at my income level, at my current situation here, my taxes would go up by $1,200, and I would have another $10,000 that I would save in the process, right? That's money in the bank for me, and this is true for tons of people. If you have insurance provided by your employer, it's part of your compensation package, and I guarantee you they are paying a lot more for it than you think, right? And that money is yours. It already belongs to you, right? It's just going off to an insurance company and you're seeing nothing from it, right? So I would try to win the argument on that and push for eliminating that sector because it simply makes good economic sense. It would free up tons more money and resources for people.
So, Sajini, and then...
I'd like to refer back to your itty-bitty nose. Please explain why you do not support Blue Lives Matter when you support Black Lives Matter. It should be all lives. The other is, I'm asking him, hey, I was respectful to everyone else. I expect the same. The other would be, and that was a lousy question, you guys were good. The pro-life, when you said no. It really, that you can't answer that yes or no, so would you expound on both of those, please?
Okay, so in both of them, they're actually rhetorical issues. If Blue Lives Matter was about Smurfs, okay, I'd be for that. But there are no blue people. Right? Black Lives Matter is making the argument that in our society, black lives do not matter as much as white lives have, and they should matter as much. Which means Black Lives Matter is already saying that all lives should matter, and that they currently do not, and is trying to push for that. Blue Lives Matter was created as a reactionary movement there against that in support of police violence. Right? Do I think that police should be targeted in some way? Of course not. Do I support the existence?
Men. I think I'll disagree. I think there was a huge There was a huge backlash, and officers were actually being targeted and killed. Do I support police? Do? Absolutely not. My son is black. He is afraid, and he shouldn't be. But there was backlash, and we need to protect them from the unreasonable backlash as much as any human being is entitled to walk in this world free of threat and harm.
We do, and my argument would be that we already do that. That it is already a problem that police officers do not have fewer rights than anybody else and do not have a history of systematic discrimination or mistreatment in this country, right? There's not a lot of unreasonable prejudice against police. They are supported by almost everyone. That there is some wacko out there that's going to target police? Yes, there are, right? Those are problematic individuals and we have to deal with that, which means, do I support policing? Of course. Right? The Blue Lives Matter movement, right, was founded on disingenuous pretext, right? And to me, Blue Lives Matter is taking a position that supports systematic police violence, not supporting police. I would rather support police, right, and the job of police and protecting them in their jobs, but not the Blue Lives Matter movement. Pro-choice part of the thing, right? Okay, so my objection to that is the terminology, right? And this is a case where Democrats have frequently fallen into using terminology originally adopted from the right? If someone says, I'm pro-life, and you're like, okay, well, I disagree with you, that means I'm like pro-death, right? You're basically acceding to their argument that you're killing babies, right? Which basically falls into a completely disingenuous, it's a trap, right? The terminology is a trap. Right? I support full bodily autonomy, right? And it's full bodily autonomy for everyone. The fact is, in this country, we frequently give a male corpse more rights than a living, breathing female, right? And that has to change. So, in fact, I support the pro-choice idea. idea, but I don't like either term. Right? Because it basically, when you put them together, it sounds like, oh, the choice to be anti-life. Right? You're basically letting them win an argument before you even had the argument. I would rather toss both terms completely, right, and simply argue for bodily autonomy.
And most pro-lifers believe in the death penalty. So
They're clearly not for life anyway, exactly. Yeah,
Okay, so there's gonna be a question in the back, and then
Oh, wait, Jenny was waiting. Carl, Jenny was waiting. We missed her.
I was skipped. So actually, I have follow-up questions as well. So you already covered two of the issues, but I wanted you to explain more about that you are not for banning high-capacity magazines, and also why you do not support Pelosi. So if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, so they're very different ones.
Yes.
The magazines issue, I think, again, falls into a trap, right? And it's simply bad politics. Whenever people go after specific things like that, whenever you start pushing for a bill against particular types of weapon or a particular, the magazine, something like that, what it does is it energizes the Republican base, and over again in states all across this country, they have loosened gun control restrictions. There are tons of states now where you can open or concealed carry with no training, no permits, nothing. Right? Just any random yahoo can walk into a pawn shop, buy a gun with nothing at all, no background check, walk out of the streets, put it in his pocket, and there you go. That's a problem for me, right? So whenever we in more liberal states push for things like that, it freaks people out across the country, and they make us all less safe. Because the fact is, we all live in the same country. People often make those arguments about well, Chicago has all these gun control laws, but they still have shootings. Well, that's because you can just walk across into Indiana and buy whatever you want in a Walmart parking lot, right? So it doesn't matter, right? So I think that it hands ammunition that actually directly harms us and makes us less safe. Right? It's also a fact that the vast majority of shootings don't actually involve high-capacity magazines anyway, so it's a relatively small slice of it. And if we start dealing with the issue of guns overall, anyway, if we start dealing with the question of background checks and the training and certification stuff that would find a lot of these people, because a lot of the people that have been caught as shooters would not have been able to get those weapons on their own anyway. Right? So I would rather address the real problems instead of doing things that actually harm us more. So it's more of a tactical issue to try and get to the objective of making us all safer. Don't chase after things that just make it worse. The Pelosi issue is more strategic. I have frequently disagreed with decisions that she's made, and in fact, this takes us back a bit here, but the fight over the Affordable Care Act, right, in 2008, right, lost us. Right, the 2010 election, which handed the redistricting, powers to the Republicans, which harmed us all across this country. Right, it was completely bungled from the word go. Right, I disagree with the way that she manages things strategically. Right, it's often a matter of chasing after, what might look good to the base, what might look good in the press in one way here, but actually directly harms your long-term interests legislatively. I see a lot of that in the current sparring that's going on here. Right, that current border bill was a decent example of that, right? Where there was a fight to stop money that was just going to be handed to the federal government to do whatever they wanted with on the border, right? And very few people in the House stood up against this, right? But what happened? As soon as they gave Trump that money, he said, okay, ICE raids are back on, right? And went right back to doing what he was going to do, which was entirely predictable. We knew he was going to do that, right? And that, to me, brings up a question of judgment, right, in terms of the leadership position. So, I don't really trust it in terms of getting something done.
Thank you. And one question here first, and then.
What is your view on the boycott, divest, and sanction movement for the state of Israel?
Now that's a huge one for me because my main teaching field is actually the Middle East. So I spend a lot of time on this, and I teach whole courses on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I really have to be careful about this question. In general, I think that it's not really the place of other countries to really put a lot of pressure here anyway. What we should be doing is simply backing off from it. The simple fact is we directly hand tons of money to the Israelis that goes directly into the occupation of the West Bank, right? Which is not well known in the way it actually looks to ordinary people. It's not even well known within the country there. Most Israelis have never set foot in the West Bank and never will, right? So they have no idea how this actually works out for ordinary people. If we could get the US government to stop directly subsidizing that, then maybe pushing in the private sector here wouldn't even be necessary, wouldn't be relevant. The simple fact is, and I like to think in terms of a historical model, okay, this is a tough one, and you guys have to bear with me here because I'm not making a direct parallel here. This is not, the situations are not exactly the same. But you guys remember the South African apartheid regime? Mm-hmm. Kind of problematic, right? Yep. More so than Israel, but problematic, right? In some similar ways. And the fact that both countries used different laws applied to different people to live in the same areas, right? That's literally what the term meant, you know, the separation and different legal systems for people, right? So similar, but not exactly the same. What stopped that, what led to the fall of the apartheid regime in South Africa, was not someone suddenly waking up one day all nice and woke and decided to walk in and have a conversation. It was international economic pressure. We were one of the only countries in the world to keep trading with apartheid South Africa, right, in the latter stages there. The Europeans cut them off, the Japanese cut them off, everyone started cutting them off, right? And it starved them for resources and it forced them to change policy direction. Right? So boycotts do have a part to play, but they only really work when they come out on the national level. Otherwise, it's just divisive rhetoric. It turns into an internal partisan issue in the US. We just attack each other over it and nothing ends up happening. Right? The simple fact is, most people do not understand this issue well enough to have an informed opinion on it anyway. Right? And, you know, and it just turns into partisan gibberish. Right? If you could actually get a message across, if you could actually clean things up and get the government behind the idea, that would make more sense to me. Right? If you could actually, on a state level, address those issues.
Okay, so looks like we have one more.
Hi, Liam. Dennis Wortham. Have you built a campaign organization? Do you have a campaign manager and an organization?
I do. Campaign manager is standing over here. Volunteer coordinator is. There are half a dozen other people that are in core positions, and then I have friends scattered all over the place that are doing like little contract things. Like I have a new version of the website that's going to be rolled out sometime in the next month or so that a friend in Portland is doing. I'm calling in favors here and there, right? But there is a local organization that's being built up here. There's actually a clipboard over there that if anyone wants to sign on to our mailing list, we're collecting information for people who want to volunteer as well. We're going to produce different lists. We can send out messages letting people know about different things. So yeah. Oh yeah, and there's like donation envelopes as well if anyone wants to keep us alive, eating or something. So yeah, but yes, there is quite a large organization already put together, a core team, and each one of the people in their own responsibilities is trying to build up their own teams.
Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we have one last question. Two more. Okay, so then Joseph and then Steve.
What is Steve?
Okay.
Could Joseph go while you're getting forward?
Okay, so there's been a recent online movement for abolish ICE. So what role do you see ICE playing in the future of the U.S.?
What role do I see it playing, or what role would I like it to play?
Yes.
What role do I see it playing? Continuing to terrorize people, tear families apart, harm the economy, harm the American family, cause tons of devastation in this country, as well as wasting tons of taxpayer money doing something that no one needs to be doing. What role would I like it to be playing? Nothing. It's not an old organization. It's quite recent, right? It does not need to exist, right? People, and this is a fun one here. It gets to another one of those places where the terminology really is important, right? If you accept the terminology that your opponent puts forward for something, you're letting them win. Illegal immigrant is one of those because there's no such thing, right? Being in the country without authorization is not actually a crime. Right? If you overstayed your visa, you have a status problem. That's it. It's not actually illegal. If you crossed the border without authorization, you committed a misdemeanor. Can anybody set up any fireworks around the 4th of July or know anyone who did it? That's a misdemeanor, right? So it's a misdemeanor, right? And having families broken up and people deported from the country here does not make sense for a misdemeanor. right? It should be treated as one. Oh, here's a fine, let's solve this problem. Make sense there? I'd rather get back to real solutions instead of knocking down people's doors and breaking families apart.
Two things. Last year, New York State and New York City made all colleges and universities free to any family that earns under $125,000. Perhaps that's a good model to explore for how they did it and how they funded it. My real question is, what do you see as the issue that we need to pursue in order to get rid of Mr. Calvert?
Okay, so you threw me off there with starting with the college question. Okay, so let's see. My approach to Mr. Calvert, right, is not going to be to bring up the kind of things that have been brought up tons of times before and not worked, right? Did anyone care that he was caught with a prostitute?
No.
Right, but did the voters care?
No.
Right, it's 20 years ago, who cares, right? It's done and gone, right? He routinely shows up, though, on the list of the top 10 most corrupt people in Congress, right? That stands out to me, and since corruption is a bipartisan issue, if you can message on that and show those places to people, that can help, right? There are a lot of people in the Republican Party who themselves do not like him. Right? But they choose him because, oh, well, he's the closer this or that, or the Democrats aren't even talking to them. One of the big issues for me is going to be twofold. One, to take a lot of my positions, right? Take a lot of my own progressive views and try to message them in a way that will make sense to independent and conservative voters. All right? Because if you can change the language you use, if you can change the way you express something and put it in terms of their concerns, right? You might be able to convince them that, oh, well, this idea isn't so scary. I kind of like this. This sounds reasonable, right? So I would try to do that, to reach out to a lot of people who have supported him in the past, right? In terms of him specifically, the things I want to attack him on are things that libertarian-minded Republicans and independents dislike about him, because that's a significant chunk of potential swing voters out here. A lot of the conservatives in this area are more libertarian-minded, which means they already overlap with us in quite a few areas, right? They differ with us on some economic points, but they don't on a lot of social points, right? So if you can find a way to talk to them effectively and show them that Calvert is more authoritarian by far, right, and more of a danger to their civil liberties than I am, then I think you can win some of those voters over.
All right, do we have any more questions? Last one. Okay, so we have a last question actually, since we have time. So this one was submitted to us online via the form that we sent out. So this one says, vote blue no matter who, is a refrain we keep seeing in social media. So all candidates, no matter which Democrat makes it past the primary, will you support the winner?
In the presidential election, where makes it past the primary?
In your election for Congressional District 42.
Oh, of course. I mean, I have every time. Right? I mean, there's no question of that. There never was. Right? So, I mean, it was mentioned earlier that Ms. Peacock had dropped out. If she was still in, if she won the primary, I would have voted for her. I did last time. Right? I was thinking about running in 2018 and stepped aside because she announced first, right? Because it didn't make sense to me to divide up resources and divide up staff and whatnot and fight this out, right? I was willing to support anybody who actually has a chance of winning in the election, and I would do that still, right? So, but yeah, also for the presidential and anything else.
Okay, and then follow up to that one. So if another candidate were to win the primary, would you also help them out as far as like pushing maybe volunteers towards them, or helping them out with as far as like maybe donations and not just a vote?
Ultimately, I think that we all need to work together, and this is one of the things that I consider to be a core plank in my candidacy as a whole, is I want to try and knit together resources all across the county. It's why I've been spending time going as far out as the desert and everywhere else out in here. We all have to work together to help each other out, provide resources, and do whatever's necessary to actually win these districts. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much I might dislike any given Democrat, they're going to be better than any given Republican out there. So,
so that concludes all the questions. So last bit is closing statements. So you have 3 minutes to let us know anything that we missed, anything that you'd like to inform us about, and then also tell us about your website, where we can donate, where we can volunteer.
Okay, so I think I've covered a lot of basics there. The website is being redeveloped. There's a basic one up now that's easy to find, liamomera.org. Right? I have the most Irish name ever, so liamomera.org, goes to me. And there's also a ton of social media accounts. So if you use like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just search Liam O'Mara, you're going to find me pretty easily. Right? If you want, sometimes if you put like Liam O'Mara the Fourth, IV at the end there. Because sometimes you'll get like, I don't know, a dozen guys in Ireland or something. But I'm the only Liam O'Mara the Fourth, so there's my originality, I guess. But so there's tons of web resources out there. There is on the website a link to the Act Blue page, right, which is good for donations there. In addition to just the envelopes that float around that way, those are the 2 main ways to help out there. There's also on the current website, there's still a way to sign on to the mailing list. I have to pull that stuff out manually and add it to our list, but it still works. If you want to sign on there, give us your email address. That puts you on our list, right? Or you can sign the sheet that's in the back here, right? And that also gets you on the email list. Let's see. I talked a little bit about strategy near the end, and I think that might be the place to really kind of like sum things up a bit about the candidacy, because this is something, I've been watching politics in this country for a long time. I've been politically actively engaged since the 1980s, and I look good for my age or whatever, but I actually was just quite precocious. My mother was furious at me, like, putting out my Mondale sign on the lawn. She's like, no, we can't put that there. And I was like, it's here. But, so I've always been involved in this sort of thing. But I think that we need to pay attention to the way we do things, right? And I think we often fall into basic traps. Right? And it's too easy in this country, especially with a for-profit media that's chasing after particular demographics just to make their money, for them to keep whipping people up in anger and get them to stop talking to each other. Right? The simple fact is, we're all still Americans and we need to talk to each other. Right? Now, I disagree with pretty much everything the current president has done. Right? Well, let's see. He got out of the TPP. There's one thing out of the entire couple of years, right, that that I can say, well, okay, that one didn't suck. Everything else, I completely despise this man's administration, right? But I don't blame his voters, right? Some of his voters are going to be hardcore nationalists and racists. We're not going to win them. You're never going to win them. But that's not all of them. Many people voted for him because he was selling a dishonest bill of goods about what he would do for the economy. Right? He spoke to people who felt insecure. They felt that they were going to lose their job. They might lose their health care. That things were getting bad for them. They couldn't afford their kids' college tuition or something here. And he was saying, I will fix things. I will bring jobs back. I will make things better for you. Okay. Most people don't follow policy well enough to know. If we go around shaming the voters, we've already lost. We have to talk to people. We have to be willing to go anywhere and actually explain to them the actual issues without butting heads directly. Right? When somebody presents their views to me, well, I like this, and I hate your idea, this is my idea. I would usually say, okay, that's interesting, right? And I'll ask some follow-up questions and then find a way to get around what they're saying. Because as soon as you start directly saying, no, you're wrong, then you fall into the same thing people constantly do on social media. They're always like yelling at each other, well, you're stupid, you get into flame wars, and you guys know that no one has ever won a Facebook argument, ever. It doesn't happen. You can argue until you're blue in the face. Everyone already has their opinion, and they're not going to change it just because you came up with a cool analogy, right? The way to do it is to figure out a way that works with them, right? That addresses their concerns, right? So one of the things that I want to do in the campaign is to go anywhere. I'll go to Elks Lodges, I'll go to the Chamber of Commerce, I'll show up anywhere and talk to people and try to explain my positions to them. And I think if we do that more honestly and openly, we have a better chance of winning over the independents in these districts. And there, how do you win? The number of Republicans has steadily fallen for the last 10 years, every single year. It keeps falling. It's getting closer and closer to the Democratic registration, right? People are growing less partisan in this country in general, right? And less loyal to the parties there. The key then is to win people over on the issues, right? And to address their direct concerns. Does that make some sense there? So that's what I want to try and do in the campaign. So that's kind of like how I'll sum up what I want to do overall. To point out, I'm Dr. Liam O'Mara for Congress.
Website.
Website again, liamomera.org. Yeah.
Yes.
Please support us.
So can we give a round of applause for And then also to Regina for being here in spirit, but not being here personally or physically. Right. So one last thing here. Young Dems, can you stand up, please? On behalf of all of us, we'd just like to say thank you. We hear a lot that we're going to be the future leading. We're the next generation that's going to be leading the future, but you're the light that's going to be guiding us. So on behalf of all of us, you being here is not just you investing in the future, it's you investing in our future. So thank you. Thank you for coming.